Did you just hear what I said? I want to be clear on what it is that you're hearing.
Welcome to the podcast, Keeping It Real, the purpose-driven life with Laura and Lynn.
Tune in for candid conversations, practical tips, inspiring stories, and actionable advice on navigating life and business. Today's topic is on effective communication. And we're going to start with talking about communication with your clients and then move into internal communication as a team, or just simply when the others you're working with. If you're a solo business, you might still find there's other interactions you have with contractors or employees, etc. So we'll hopefully have time to talk about that as well. But this is one of my favorite topics.
Yes, specialist.
Well, I was sharing with Lynn that I have this plaque on communication. It's a little picture, it says communication on it, that one of my dear friends and one of the managing partners of the business that I owned, he gave to me because I was known as the communicator. I was the one who didn't want to sweep things under the carpet. I wanted to make sure we were being effective, communicators, not only with our clients, but also with each other. I find I still go back to that time and I think about how differently I communicated in my early 30s compared to where I'm at now in life. And so I think it's also important to understand how we come across when we're communicating. So as the sender of information, if I'm communicating my product or my services, I'm going to be talking about them and think they are coming across a certain way. And actually, the receiver of this information will be processing from their context, from their background, from their previous experiences. And so I think that's important to note because we don't know what kinds of experiences they've had. If they've been if they've been negative or if they've struggled with something, they're going to bring that into the interactions with us. So the sooner that I can establish trust in the communications, I think that helps relationship. But I also want to be really clear and concise. And I know that in terms of communicating, sometimes I can get a little verbose. So maybe over communicating. I know, shocking. I already feel like I'm doing that right now.
No, sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah. I sometimes with your services, this might be something that is important to some of our listeners. I am a course designer. I design learning experiences, most of those online, asynchronous as well as synchronous, remote. And I was just going through a user experience session with a client. And this is what I'm talking about, even in terms of communication. Like what I thought I was communicating in the course, there's a couple tweaks to be made because how I was sharing the information was not the way this new user to the platform was receiving it. And so yes. I think it's really important not to take that personally. And to recognize, oh yes, okay, I can tweak this. I can word this differently so that it's more clear. Lynn, what do you think? How does this pertain to your profession and business experience?
For sure, communication is huge. Any area of life, either personally or business. Especially in business, you definitely want to be clear on what it is that you're wanting to relay to people. But one of the things that I was sharing earlier is just about, we have this check system that we're using now. And the check system is about, wait a minute, did you hear me? Because a lot of times you don't actually hear what the person said. And so down the road, they go, well, we discussed that. And I would go, no, we didn't discuss that. And now it's, well, wait a minute. Okay, did you just hear what I said? And sometimes, because as in our busy world today, you can get distracted with, squirrel, but you can get distracted with things. And so communication is by far the number one thing about any relationship, that whether it be business or employees, or like we're talking about clients, is just so that we're clear. I want you to know is that what we can do for you. I want to be clear on what it is that you're hearing. Basically, you want them to know that they're hearing what it is that you're offering. Otherwise, you say, well, I didn't know that was thrown in. Well, I didn't know. I would have done it if I would have known. I would have known. For me, just making sure that I hear what it is that's being said, because as the story goes, okay, there's been times when I didn't hear what they were saying. And I would say, I never heard that. Now, was it blacked out and I actually heard it, but it wasn't important, so I kicked it out? Or was it that I just simply wasn't in the room at that moment and something was said, then I kicked it out? Either way, at the end of the day, what happens is that there's missing information. There's important missing information. I didn't get that. Meaning that something was said, could have been extremely important. The problem is that in my head, I didn't get it. So I don't have the communication. I don't know what's important because I didn't hear it. So what's happening now, especially in my relationship, is that we're checking with each other okay, now you heard what I said, right? About that this appointment on Thursday, you can only do it at 1:00, right? You heard that part, right? So there's a checking system that we're now doing. And so it's the same thing that we're realizing now about that communication is so important. But one, is a person here listening, actually listening to what's being said? Two, what did you hear? Because boy, that's the thing. We can start with one thing of, this is what I said, this is not what you said. Okay, there's that piece of it. And then there's, of course, and there's the other thing. And did you mean for that to be hurtful? I mean, and of course you can't say it that way. You can't. I mean, were you trying to, right? So Laura, it comes back to communication. Ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just say,
Ow,
ouch.
ow.
Did I hear that right? No, and that's great, because what you're talking about too is you've built that relationship. You have trust between each other, so you can have these open conversations and kind of filter through them, where the first time you're interacting with a client, you don't have that yet. And so I think that's being right up front with the client and say, I didn't quite hear that. Would you mind repeating it, or repeating what they said to make sure you got it right? Or even asking them, I mean, in written communication, bullet points, just keep it brief, bullet points. But making sure that's why we have contracts, agreements. So in the coaching industry, we create an agreement so that everyone's on the same page, so that you know exactly what to expect from the relationship. Because otherwise people will come back and say, well, I never heard you say that, or they don't want to read the details. I found that out in my user session. They didn't read the details. It was too much information. And so how can you concisely share your information? And it might take more than once. It might have to be, little bite-sized pieces of it as you're talking to them. I don't know if that makes sense. So I definitely want to ask the client, does that make sense? You want to get to that point where you have that open relationship and you can just share things back and forth. But then I also am aware that the more you know someone, like you said, you may not be listening as closely. And so that active listening and treating even a client that's been with you for a while, knowing that they might be experiencing something differently for the first time. So that novice experience, are we explaining things to a novice, or are we expecting them to have the same background, the same expertise that we have, which may not be accurate?
I think a lot of times when we're speaking like somebody's inside of your head, right? You kind of go, well, they're going to understand this because they're right. And really you want to take the position of exact opposite, which is the position of this person doesn't know anything about what it is I'm talking about. So that just the simpler, plainer version of it to the point, right? But that they're able to grasp that it may be a little more information, but not under information, and them interpreting is sometimes a little too much.
I would love to have this be one of our group conversations with our community,
yes.
Just so that we had examples to, people could toss out and say, okay, what would I do in this situation? For example, I was working with a coaching client, and she needed to communicate in writing and through email how she felt about a meeting and the feedback that she had received from the meeting. That's challenging. And with so many individuals remote, the question is, do you pick up the phone and call? Or do you send back that email? And is that email going to become too long that they're not going to read your point?
Right.
So really being conscious to, what's in the title of your email, how concise can you write it? And if it's going to take you more than a few sentences, maybe it needs to be a phone call, and setting that up and saying, hey, can I just give you a quick call? And handling it that way, because so much sometimes gets lost in the in a written format.
Right.
So just,
yeah,
like communicating this way, we can at least see each other and see our facial expressions, where it's even better in person. But then again, we could misinterpret those expressions, right? Have you ever been in a meeting where someone's starting to fall asleep and you're like, oh, I'm really boring them, May have nothing to do with me.
Right. Yes, exactly. Well, and then I think the one thing that I wanted to add to this was just about making sure that so when we talk about our groups, and one of the reasons that we do the groups and we're passionate about having groups and people being exposed to each other. So what ends up happening is it's hard to really see how you come across. Like, we envision this is how I'm coming across, and then come to find out the person says, yeah, that's not how it came across to me. And so we want feedback on that. You want feedback on, well, how did that feel to everybody? Or that felt really good to everybody. So that's the beauty of having a group setting, having individual, is so that you're not assuming that how it's being interpreted, or you're not assuming on how somebody's responding to you. And you get feedback on how somebody's responding to you. You get feedback on how it's coming across, because it's so important. And you want that, because otherwise, if you ask, your partner, how's that feel? Oh, feels good. That's not the feedback you want. You really want, and especially as more and more of things go online, you really want more. This is going to become a more important, because now it's how did it come across? Because in person, a lot of times it's easier to come across because of you do have the facial, you do have the manners, but you do have the hand talking. But online, a lot of times your hand's not in the video, so they don't really know. You get a lot, but you don't get everything. So more and more, and it's getting important about having feedback about how things are coming across, how it's interpreted, how it feels, things like that.
And that's where I think my recommendation also, if you're new to communicating with clients, you would want to make sure that you're scripting out, when you're talking about your service, when you're talking about your product, have a script on how you're going to communicate what it's all about, and that will also help you in the sales. So, that's something that we'll follow up with in an online session where we're walking you through, what does that sales script look like? So that way you're also really sure that you're effectively communicating.
I think what we're wanting to stress here in this episode is just how important communication is, that it's obviously crucial in a business, and we're finding out more and more how, I mean, for a long time, I think we thought everybody that heard us heard it exactly the way we wanted them to hear it, and that they heard it. We definitely have things that can help you with that, in terms of groups or individuals or whatever it is that you need, and take it seriously, because your whole business is based on communication. There's nothing, everything, whether it's written or verbal, your whole business is about communication. So with that, we're going to leave you, and remember, be you and be real.